Welcome! In this video we're going to look at completing the square in an equation. It's very different than completing the square in an expression, which we will look at next. As we write down the steps over on the left side, we're going to apply those steps to an equation on the right side to help illustrate the technique. And our example equation is going to be 2x squared minus 4x minus 8 equals 0. Alright? And so when working with an equation, a quadratic equation, and I'm going to attempt to complete the square, the first thing I want to do is get it in standard form. Alright? In standard form is when I have it written as ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. And what that really translates to is I'm going to write my polynomial in descending order, so the highest power down to the lowest, and I'm going to make sure that my equation is set equal to 0. That's in standard form. That is true about my equation, so we're good to go to the next step. Alright? So our next step is to make sure the coefficient in front of your squared term is 1. So our coefficient is 2, so we're going to have to do something to change that. Let's write down the step. Make sure the coefficient, so that's the number, in front of your squared term is 1. Alright, since ours is a 2, we're going to factor out that 2, and we're going to have x squared minus 2x minus 4 equals 0. So I factor that 2 out of the whole equation. And actually, let's actually factor out of just the left side. This is the nice thing about an equation. And then I can divide both sides by that 2. And I'm left with just x squared minus 2x minus 4 equals 0. Now my coefficient in front of my squared term is 1, and I'm ready to go to the next step. Alright, the next step is the one that sounds the most convoluted. So I'm going to say it a couple of times. What we're going to do is we're going to take the coefficient in front of the x term, so this time it's this negative 2, so take the coefficient in front of the x term, alright, coefficient in front of the x term, and we're going to divide it by 2, square it, and then add it to both sides. Alright? Divide it by 2, square it, add it to both sides. Alright, that's going to be, that one sounds the most convoluted, but it really isn't. So I'm going to come over here in a different color so that I'm making sure it's not part of my equation. I'm going to take that negative 2, that's the coefficient in front of the x term. I'm going to divide it by 2, which is negative 1. I'm going to square that, so negative 1 squared is just 1, and then I'm going to add that to both sides. So I get x squared minus 2x plus 1 minus 4 equals plus 1. So this is the 1 that I added to both sides. Alright, now I want to move that negative 4 over here because I want the part of the equation that is the completion of the square on one side alone. So this I'm going to rewrite as x squared minus 2x plus 1 equals 5. Alright? Okay, so now that I have added half the coefficient of the x term squared to both sides, step 4 is going to be to factor the left side. Alright, so this x squared minus 2x plus 1 becomes x minus 1 squared. It will always factor so nicely if I complete the square correctly. Since everything else is over on the right side, I can just rewrite x minus 1 squared equals 5. Alright? Now my next step, I'm going to run out of board space, is to square root both sides. Alright, so here, if I take the square root of x minus 1 squared, I get x minus 1, and if I take the square root of 5 on the right, what I actually get is plus or minus the square root of 5. Because both of those, when squared, will give me x minus 1 squared. Alright? Or both of plus or minus the square root of 5 when squared will give me 5. So my last and final step is to solve, let's write it right next to it. Solve for x. Alright? So x is going to be equal to 1 plus or minus the square root of 5. Dun dun dun. And that was the completing of the square of our original equation. Check back for another video where we see a few more examples work.